Hi, I'm Milas. At my sister's wedding, in front of 200 people, my father took the mic and said, "If we could choose again, we would never have given birth to you." So I stood up, walked out, and by morning, I had 86 missed calls. But that wasn't the part that broke me. It was realizing they'd been using my name, for years, to open credit cards, fund events, even secure the venue for the wedding I wasn't wanted at. And the moment I pulled the plug, everything they built collapsed. Why did the golden child get the glory while I carried the debt? In silence. What else had they stolen from me, without ever saying a word? I pulled up to the estate in Napa, just after 1:30. The kind of place with gravel driveways so finely manicured, they looked curated. Rows of Chardonnay vines framed the hill behind the venue like a carefully placed backdrop, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a flutter of nerves as I parked my car and stepped out. I had RSVP'd, like everyone else. I'd booked my own hotel, drove my own car, and I walked into the venue on my own 2 feet. No fanfare, no personal welcome, not even a casual, "Hey, good to see you," from the front desk. Just a clipboard with a list of names I wasn't on. Instead, the coordinator blinked, hesitated, and pulled out an iPad. "Oh, your family?" she asked, scrolling fast. I gave her my full name. She typed something, then finally said, "Oh, right. You're Zinnia's sister." Not Malis, not Ms. Caldwell, not even a first-name nod of familiarity. Just an attachment, an afterthought. That should have been my first clue. A cousin had sent me a screenshot of the digital invite a few days ago, after I mentioned I hadn't received one. The graphic was beautiful. Minimalist cream and gold, perfect calligraphy. Under, "With love, from our families," it listed Dorian and Vera Caldwell, and family of the bride. That was it. I wasn't there, not even in print. When I'd mentioned it to Zinnia, she'd laughed like I was overthinking. "Probably a printing glitch, May. Don't be dramatic. You know how Mom is with tech." I didn't reply, because I knew exactly how Mom was. With tech, with words, with perception. She was deliberate. Always. The staff led me toward the reception lawn. There were white tents, round tables with pastel runners, roses at every place setting. It smelled expensive and organized. Controlled. I followed the girl through the maze of smiling guests and soft jazz until we stopped at a table tucked near the service door. The overflow placard sat like a punchline. I glanced behind me. Yes, the kitchen's swinging door was maybe 6 feet away. I sat. The view was blocked by a decorative pillar, and the only people at my table were 2 older second cousins from Wisconsin and someone's +1 wearing AirPods. Across the courtyard, the main table shone under fairy lights. Zinnia, radiant. Mom and Dad at her sides. I spotted place cards. Aunt Carolyn, Uncle Marcus. Even the neighbor from our old street was seated front and center. But me? I was next to the staff entrance, sipping lukewarm white wine someone forgot to chill. I smiled. The kind people do when a waiter brings you the wrong dish, and you pretend it's fine, because sending it back feels worse. Dorian walked past not long after, talking to someone on the phone. He nodded at me, mid-sentence, then looked away before I could say anything. It wasn't cold. It was automatic. Vera arrived half an hour later in a silk lavender gown, air-kissing everyone like royalty. She hugged a cousin I hadn't seen in a decade, smiled at a child she barely knew. Her eyes landed on me. Passed. Didn't stop. A man leaned toward me from the next table. "Didn't know you were still in touch with the family," he said, in that falsely amused tone that pretends to joke, but really means it. I didn't answer. I sipped my wine and kept my eyes on Zinnia, who was now posing with a line of bridesmaids under the wisteria arch. I remembered the time she lost her college deposit because she forgot to sign the loan form. I'd paid it. Quietly. No one ever brought it up again. Just like I'd paid the venue deposit. Because Dorian's credit score couldn't swing it, and Mom said it was a technicality. "Of course we'll reimburse you," she'd promised. That was 5 months ago. They hadn't. Not that I needed the money. It wasn't about that. It was about being told, with every silent omission, that I was useful, but not worthy of acknowledgement, that I could pay, but not belong. As the sun dipped low, the rehearsal dinner moved into speeches. The mic crackled. People tapped forks against glasses. Vera stepped up to the stage, graceful and composed. "First of all," she began, voice honeyed, "thank you to everyone who made this day possible. My husband Dorian, our beautiful Zinnia, and all our loved ones who traveled to be here." She smiled at the crowd, eyes shining. She looked right at me, and then turned to her left and raised a toast. Over me, around me, through me. I didn't flinch. I just held my glass, fingers tightening, the rim trembling slightly against my palm. The applause faded as Vera stepped off the small stage, her hands still clasped like she was absorbing the afterglow of her own words. I remained in my seat, letting the hollow echo of her speech settle in my chest. The names she'd listed replayed in my mind like scratches on an old record. Every cousin, every neighbor, even that one woman from her book club. Everyone but me. I wasn't surprised, but being prepared for something doesn't make it hurt any less. There was a kind of craft to the way she excluded me. Seamless, socially acceptable. She didn't forget I was omitted, and everyone in that tent knew it. A few guests glanced in my direction, just long enough to register the absence. One older man, a friend of Dorian's, had the decency to look away when our eyes met. The rest just kept sipping their champagne, eyes flicking back to Zinnia like well-trained guests at a coronation. It takes a certain skill to erase someone from a celebration they paid for, I thought. My hands rested in my lap, fingers laced tightly. I didn't trust them not to shake if I picked up my glass. The sun had started to dip below the hills when I wandered toward the reception area, where staff were preparing the gift showcase. Rows of carefully curated mementos, baby photos, dance recital snapshots, and at the center, a framed scrapbook open to a page of glitter, magazine cutouts, and a ticket stub from a county fair. My throat went dry. That was mine. I made that scrapbook when I was 16, during one of the summers we couldn't afford a vacation. I spent hours on it, cutting, gluing, lettering in gold pen. It was my birthday gift to Zinnia that year. She'd smiled when I gave it to her, barely glanced through it, then tossed it on her dresser where it sat for months. Now it was the centerpiece of her memory table. A small plaque beneath the glass read, "From Zinnia to herself. She's always been so creative." I touched the frame, just for a second. No one saw. Or if they did, they pretended not to. I backed away slowly, the world around me muffled by the sound of blood rushing in my ears. The garden lights had come on, soft and twinkling, casting everything in a romantic haze. Families clustered under the trellises, wine in hand, laughter rising like steam. I kept walking. Past the bar, past the photo booth, where someone was laughing in a giant heart-shaped pair of glasses. Past the rows of candlelit tables, where my name had never been carved into the seating chart. I reached the fountain at the edge of the lawn and sat down on the stone ledge, the cold seeping into my dress. I stared at the water, still and glowing in the light, and let the silence wrap around me. This wasn't new. The thefts had just become more elegant over time. When we were younger, I made birthday cards by hand. Zinnia would show them off to her friends as if she'd made them. Mom used to say, "Let her have this one. You get enough attention at school." I didn't, but I didn't argue. I stopped signing my work. Stopped making things altogether. Invisible things couldn't be stolen. That's what I taught myself. Until now. My phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out, unlocked it, and opened a blank message to Zinnia. "You can keep the credit, but you'll lose more than a name tonight." I stared at it, didn't send it. A sound behind me made me turn. Cassian stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, looking strangely hesitant. "I saw the collage," he said softly. I didn't reply. He stepped closer, his voice low. "That scrapbook, I noticed the corner. You signed it. Bottom left. In gold ink. I looked at him then. Really looked. And that's when I realized I wasn't the only one who noticed what was stolen. The door to my suite closed behind me with a dull click. I stood for a moment, letting the silence settle. The hallway behind me buzzed faintly with distant laughter and clinking glasses. Life went on in the other rooms, the real family rooms, the ones with monogrammed welcome baskets and personalized notes from Vera herself. Mine was at the end of the guest wing, a converted storage room, barely touched since the last renovation. I dropped my clutch on the small desk, kicked off my heels, and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was too firm, the room too cold, the silence too loud. I pulled out my phone, opened the Notes app, and began typing. No plan, no agenda, just the slow unraveling of memory. It always started with something small. I was 19 when I sat across from Vera in our kitchen, the same worn table where she once taught me to cut out coupons from the Sunday paper. My hands were clenched in my lap. I'd said it fast before I could lose my nerve. Her expression didn't change. "You're pregnant?" she asked, like I'd said I'd lost my car keys. I nodded. She took a sip of her tea, then said, "You know this will ruin Zinnia's college recommendation, right? Word travels fast in small towns, and people love gossip." I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. I wasn't asking for permission, just support. Vera didn't blink. "You're smart, Melis. You'll bounce back. But this will taint her name. She's already dealing with enough." The next morning, she drove me to the clinic without saying a word. She waited in the parking lot, sunglasses on, scrolling her phone. She didn't ask how I felt afterward. I didn't offer. We drove home in silence, and when we got back, she handed me a grocery list. That was it. I never spoke about it again, not even to myself. I closed the app, locked my phone, and leaned back. The ceiling above me had a small crack running through it, jagged like the truth I'd tried to patch over for years. There was more, of course. There always was. Senior year, I spent weeks writing my scholarship essay. It was raw, vulnerable, about growing up invisible in a household where I learned to disappear to keep peace. I submitted it on a Sunday. By Thursday, I overheard Zinnia reading something nearly identical at a brunch celebrating her own award. She used my words. She'd found my draft on our shared laptop. At the table, everyone clapped. Vera dabbed her eyes. "That's my girl," she'd said, "always so insightful." Afterward, I tried to confront her. Quietly. Just the two of us. Vera looked at me like I'd insulted her religion. "Let it go," she said. "You'll win something else. Don't be petty." And that was when I learned. In this family, Zinnia created the magic, and I was the backstage crew. The phone buzzed beside me again. A message from Cassian. "Saw the speech tonight. For what it's worth." I noticed everything. I stared at it, unsure why that simple line made my chest tighten. I typed back, "Not the first time I've been erased." A pause. Then his reply, "Then maybe it's time you write a different script." I stared at that sentence like it held a key I hadn't realized I needed. Maybe he was right. I got up, walked to my suitcase, and pulled out my laptop. Logged in. Opened the folder I'd locked and renamed 3 times over the years. Inside were PDF scans, bank statements, contracts, all the things I'd kept because I knew, one day, I might need proof. One document caught my eye. The venue agreement. My name, my signature, my credit card. They used my name to book the place, to secure the catering, to pay the deposit, and then left me out of the invitation. I highlighted the file, hovered my cursor over Send to Attorney. I didn't blink. I didn't hesitate. Let's see who really made this day happen. I didn't sleep much. The bed was stiff, the room too quiet, and somewhere between the last glass of wine and the first flicker of morning light, I stopped pretending to rest and started preparing. By 6:30, I was at the small desk in my room, nursing a black coffee and refreshing my inbox. I almost missed it, tucked between spam and a discount from a yoga app. A subject line from my credit monitoring service. Alert, new transaction detected. My heart thudded once. I clicked. It was a charge from a home goods store. Not mine, not my card, at least not one I used anymore. Curious, I opened the full report. 3 credit cards, all active, all maxed out, all in my name. I sat very still. One was for furniture, another for boutique clothing. The last one had monthly charges for a storage unit I didn't know existed. I pulled the address. Southern California. Zinnia's zip code. I didn't need to dig further. The pattern was too familiar. Their names weren't on the paperwork. But the behavior? Classic Vera and Dorian? They'd turned me into a resource, financially and emotionally, then acted surprised when I noticed I'd been used. They didn't just erase me, I typed into my notes app. They branded me useful and spent me. I tapped the screen a few more times and pulled up my encrypted folder. Lior's contact was still saved under old habits. We hadn't spoken in a while, but I trusted him. Not because he used to love me, but because he never lied to me. That was rarer. I sent the documents with a brief message. Can we talk? Found something. He replied in minutes. I'll call at 10. Don't do anything drastic. Too late for that. By the time breakfast rolled around, the sun was already burning hot against the back patio where they'd set up tables for a family-only meal. I wasn't hungry, but I went. Showing up, after all, was part of the game. I found a corner seat. Zinnia avoided eye contact. Vera played hostess. Dorian poured mimosas like nothing had ever gone wrong. After 20 minutes of surface chatter, Dorian leaned toward me and said, "Can we talk privately?" I didn't answer right away, just followed him through a side door into the garden walkway. The flowers smelled like chlorine and money. He stopped near a shaded bench and turned. Too smooth, too calm. "You're not thinking of making trouble today, are you?" I tilted my head. "Define trouble." He gave a short chuckle, eyes cold. "You've always been the quiet one. Don't change that now, or you'll regret it." I stared at him. Let him think that line had weight. He wasn't done. "You remember your first year of college?" he asked, lowering his voice. "You were in a fragile place, missed some classes, saw someone, if I remember right. We kept that quiet for you, protected your image." Ah, there it was. "We can destroy it too," he added. He thought fear would work. He thought I was still that girl who sat at the kitchen table waiting for them to approve of her. I took a breath, then met his gaze evenly. "You forget I have copies too. Maybe it's time the world sees all of it, yours included." He blinked. Just once. Then turned, lips tight, and walked away without another word. I didn't follow. I pulled out my phone, opened my notes app again, and typed, "They expect me to be silent. That's their first mistake." I scrolled through the evidence folder. Bank statements, screenshots, letters, timelines. I wasn't emotional anymore. I was methodical. I had stopped looking for an apology. Now I wanted accountability. I returned to my suite just in time to hear a knock at the door. A young staff member stood there, eyes nervous. "Miss Caldwell? Your presence is requested in the main lounge. There's, an issue with the guest list." Of course there is. The reception hall shimmered with rented perfection. Crystal chandeliers, soft jazz humming through hidden speakers. Centerpieces so symmetrical they could have been computer-generated. I stepped through the entrance and paused, scanning the sea of people. Every table was full. Every face seemed familiar and distant at once. I walked toward the side, where my name tag waited at a table near the exit sign. No one stopped me to say hello. A few nodded, the kind of polite acknowledgement you give a +1 you don't recognize. Someone's uncle clapped me lightly on the shoulder as he passed, saying, "Didn't expect to see you here?" Neither did I. At the main table, Zinnia sat radiant in her custom dress, hands resting delicately on the arm of Cassian's chair. Vera and Dorian flanked them, glowing in the spotlight they'd engineered. A photographer crouched nearby, angling his lens toward the stage. "Excuse me, miss," he said to me. "Could you step just a bit to the left? We're trying to get the family." I smiled, moved aside. I'd become an expert at that. The music dimmed, a signal for speeches. Forks clinked against glass. Vera rose first, commanding the room in a lavender gown that shimmered with every step. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice syrup smooth. "We're so proud of Zinnia. She's overcome so much. Her strength, our family's strength, it's what binds us." She smiled wide, gesturing toward the crowd. "To the friends who flew in, to those who stood by us, and to those who made this day possible, you know who you are." I didn't blink, not when she said it. Not when her gaze slipped past me like I wasn't sitting 10 feet away. I just held my glass and waited for the second blow. Dorian took the mic next. He straightened his jacket, cleared his throat, and chuckled. "You know, every family's got that one child who tests the waters, who pushes limits, who, let's be honest, makes you question your decisions." Laughter rippled through the guests. He looked at me, full eye contact. "If we could choose again," his voice didn't tremble, "we would never have given birth to you." There it was. Gasps. A few stunned murmurs. Someone dropped a fork. I didn't react, not visibly. I was past the part of my life where I let their words melt me. Instead, I stood, adjusted the sleeves of my dress, picked up my purse, and walked forward, not away. The room held its breath as I approached the head table. Zinnia tensed. Vera blinked fast. Dorian's jaw tightened. I reached into my bag, pulled out a cream-colored envelope, and set it gently in front of Vera. "For your records," I said, "so you can see whose name was really on the checks." My voice was even, my smile steady. I turned and walked down the center aisle, heels clicking against the marble floor. Behind me, a murmur began, low and rising, like wind picking up before a storm. Chairs scraped, whispered questions. Outside, the air was cooler. I felt it hit my skin like a truth I didn't have to explain. From the corner of my eye, I saw Cassian stand. He took one step, then stopped. Zinnia's hand gripped his wrist, nails digging in. I kept walking. Down the gravel path, past the valet station, past the rows of vines I had helped pay for. A photographer stood frozen near the fountain, camera still dangling from his hand. By the time I reached the parking lot, my phone buzzed in my hand. One missed call. Dorian. 2 more. Vera. 12 from Zinnia. I didn't answer. I didn't slow down. I turned off the phone, slipped it into my purse, and kept walking. I barely made it back to my suite before the first call came in. The screen lit up with Dorian's name, then Vera's, then Zinnia's. I didn't answer any of them. I set the phone face down on the nightstand, poured myself a glass of wine from the complimentary bottle I'd picked up myself, not one from the welcome baskets the real guests received, and watched the phone vibrate its way toward the edge. 86 calls by the end of the first hour. Funny how the silence that once made them comfortable now made them panic. I scrolled through the voicemails as I sipped, Vera's voice trembling with a practiced warmth. "Sweetheart, I know that speech wasn't ideal, but let's not overreact. We didn't mean it. You're upsetting the flow of the day." Zinnia, clipped and sharp. "What did you send the venue? Mom said they called. You need to fix this, like now." Dorian's was colder. "If this is about the money, we can settle it later. Don't embarrass the family more than you already have." The family, their favorite defense. I ignored them all. Instead, I opened my inbox. There it was, an email from the events coordinator. "Maelis Caldwell, per clause 3.2 of our agreement, hosting permissions have been suspended pending verification of signer identity. We require your direct confirmation to proceed with the evening's events." I stared at it for a few seconds. Then I hit reply. "Yes, that's correct. This event was booked under my authority. Any continuation without my consent is a breach of contract. Send. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a new number. The coordinator herself, flustered and breathless. Miss Caldwell, I just want to confirm, you're officially revoking access? I leaned back in the chair, crossed my legs, and said calmly, They used my name. They ignored my presence. Both can't be true. She didn't respond right away. I heard voices rising behind her, someone shouting in the background. We'll be in touch. The call ended. I pulled up Instagram. Posts were already flooding in. Hashtags, Sieur Zinnia, and Cassian, Sieur Vineyard vows, Sieur Caldwell celebrates. Then came the confused updates. Reception pause? Staff just stopped serving. What's going on? Anyone else think the bride looked pissed? I took a screenshot of one captioned, Who even paid for this? And sent it to Lior with the subject line, Execution complete. The sun had begun its descent outside, casting amber streaks across the vineyard. I walked to the window, wine in hand, and let myself feel it. Not the guilt, not the grief, but the confirmation. They'd pushed too far. They'd used every inch of me and expected me to thank them for it. I remembered something I'd once read online. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the one you're meant to keep. At the time, I thought it was a little dramatic. Now it felt like a benediction. The phone vibrated again. Voicemail number 27. I considered deleting it, then changed my mind. I hit play. Cassian's voice, low and steady. Maëlys, what you did, it changed everything. I need to talk to you. Alone. My thumb hovered over the screen. It stayed there longer than I expected. It was nearly dusk when the text came in. We're all here. Can you come back so we can talk? Just the family. Just us. It was from Zinnia. Of course it was. Not Vera, not Dorian, Zinnia. Always the one they sent when they needed the illusion of grace. I stared at the screen for a moment, then set it down without replying. 15 minutes later, I stood outside the private meeting room tucked behind the wine cellar. The door was slightly ajar, voices low but unmistakable. I tapped record on my phone, slipped it into my coat pocket, and walked in. The scene was staged like a therapeutic circle, chairs arranged in a half moon. Vera sat poised, one leg crossed neatly over the other. Dorian looked tense, arms folded. Zinnia feigned softness with a neutral smile. Then I saw her. Aven. She sat between Vera and Zinnia like she belonged there. My childhood friend. The one who used to sleep over at our house when her parents fought. The one I told every secret to until I learned she'd stopped keeping them. I didn't say anything, just sat. Zinnia was the first to speak. We didn't expect this from you, Maëlys, but we understand. She reached out a hand that hovered, never landing. We're family. We forgive you. If you're ready to make things right. Vera chimed in, voice syrupy. You hurt your sister. A lot of people were embarrassed, but it's not too late to fix it. I looked at them. All of them. Then, slowly, I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and placed it face up on the table. The red recording icon glowed like a warning light. This meeting, I said, is being documented. Continue. Vera flinched. Dorian muttered something under his breath and stood as if to leave, but Zinnia grabbed his wrist and held him in place. You invited a meeting, I said. I invited truth. The room shifted. The script had been broken. Aven stood then, like she had something meaningful to say, but her voice faltered. She stepped toward me, lowering hers. Can we talk outside? I didn't move. Why? So you can lie to me where it won't be recorded? She froze. I know about the cafe, I continued. I know Vera sponsored it, helped with permits, the launch party, the PR consultant, all of it. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her silence said more than any excuse would have. You weren't neutral, I said, turning my gaze toward Vera. You were bought. Zinnia's voice rose, brittle. This is ridiculous. We're trying to be reasonable. I stood. No, I said. You're trying to recover control. You wanted me quiet. I gave you silence for years. This is what happens when you break that contract. I turned and walked out, past the rows of wine bottles, past the whispers that tried to claw at my back. Outside, the air was thick with the scent of wet vines and dust. Cassian leaned against the stone wall near the fountain, hands in his pockets. He didn't say anything, just nodded as I passed. That was enough. Back in my suite, I slipped off my heels and poured another glass of water. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was from Lior. Subject: Media inquiry. Wedding collapse story in circulation. Want to comment? I stared at it for a long second. Then, aloud, to no one, I said, "Let them print it." It started with a ping, then another, then a flood. I was sitting on the porch of my rental, with a cup of coffee going cold in my hands, when I noticed the buzzing wouldn't stop. My phone lit up with text after text, notifications stacked like a tower ready to fall. I opened Instagram first. My cousin Sarah, sweet, oblivious Sarah, had posted a clip from the reception. Just the toast. She'd captioned it innocently. But it wasn't just the toast. It was the moment Dorian, standing beneath fairy lights and chandeliers, said the words, "If we could choose again, we would never have given birth to you." Someone had reposted it on TikTok. Then someone else. The caption read, "WTF did her dad just say?" And then came the comments. "This is abuse. You can tell she's been their scapegoat for years. Someone find this woman and tell her she's not crazy." I watched the clip play again and again. My face wasn't visible in the shot, but my silence was. The way I stood, the way I didn't flinch, the way I walked out. It went viral in under 2 hours. Zinnia texted me, "Take it down, you're ruining lives." I didn't respond, because the truth didn't belong to them anymore. It belonged to whoever needed to hear it and say, "Me too." By morning, my name was trending in ways I never imagined. Not for an award, not for a title, but for surviving something most people never even realized was real. I thought I'd feel satisfaction. Instead, I felt clarity. The knock at the door came just before 9. I knew who it was before I opened it. Cassian stood on the step, wrinkled shirt, tired eyes. He held a coffee, unopened. For me, I guessed. "I didn't sign up to marry into cruelty," he said. He didn't ask to come in, just sat down on the edge of the porch, like he'd done it 1,000 times before. "During the intervention," he said, "Zinnia laughed, said you were being dramatic, said you always had a flair for spectacle." He looked over at me. That's when I realized, you weren't the problem, they were. We didn't talk much more. He left the coffee on the railing when he stood. I watched him walk back to his car. He didn't look back. An hour later, I saw his post. "Respect should start at home. I won't marry into a legacy of emotional abuse." Vera would be furious. Dorian would probably sue someone. Zinnia, well, Zinnia would spiral. I didn't have to imagine it. I could already hear her voice in my head. How dare he? How dare I? What would people think? I didn't feel joy. Not exactly. But there was a quiet release. Like a breath I'd held since childhood had finally found its way out. They built a castle out of my silence. Now they could choke on the dust. Lior called around noon. "They're panicking," he said. "A few outlets want statements. I've told them no comment, for now." "I didn't mean for it to go this far," I said. Lior was quiet for a second. But this is what happens when truth stops being whispered. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. That evening, as the sun dipped below the vines, my phone rang again. A number I hadn't seen in a decade. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. "Melis?" A voice, soft, familiar. "I saw the video," she said. "I think it's time we talk. It's Aunt Isolde." The next morning arrived cloaked in stillness. For the first time in days, I woke up without the buzz of alerts or the sound of someone yelling outside a reception tent. Instead, There was only the light tapping of a ceiling fan and the quiet ache behind my ribs. I met Aunt Isolde at a small cafe just outside of town. It was the kind of place where the wood chairs wobbled slightly and the air smelled like burnt espresso and buttered toast. She was already seated when I walked in, hands wrapped around a chipped mug. Her face had aged, not harshly, but honestly. Lines carved from silence, not softness. When I sat down, she didn't reach for a hug. She just looked at me, then said, "I saw too much of myself in you. That's why I left. That's why I couldn't watch anymore." I didn't cry. I nodded. That was all we needed. She opened her bag and pulled out a folder, yellowed at the edges. "Your grandfather's original will," she said, "before it got updated." I stared at it. She continued, voice steady. "It named you as the primary heir. He knew what Dorian and Vera were. He wanted to break the pattern, but after he died, they pressured me to stay quiet. I didn't have the strength then." She exhaled. "You've given me that strength now." I slid the folder into my purse without opening it. The weight of it felt like proof of something I'd always known, but never dared say aloud. As we walked out of the cafe, I bumped into someone I hadn't seen in over a decade. Tony, one of Dorian's former employees. He looked older, thinner, eyes darting before settling on mine. "I heard," he said softly. "Saw the video." I didn't respond. He reached into his coat pocket and handed me an envelope. "I kept these, just in case someone like you ever needed them." Inside were bank logs, internal memos, authorization forms. It didn't take long to recognize what they were. Proof that Dorian had moved family trust money into Zinnia's personal account, using my name. "Thank you," I said, but I think he knew it meant more than that. Back in my rental car, I laid everything across the passenger seat. The will, the wedding invoices, the bank records, screenshots from the viral clip. Each item felt like a brick in a house no one believed I'd been building. It wasn't just emotional erasure, I whispered to myself. It was institutional, intentional, strategic. I drove straight to Lior's office. He read each document slowly, carefully, laying them out like a puzzle on his desk. When he finished, he looked at me. "They built their legacy on your silence," he said. "Let's build yours on the truth." I nodded. We drafted the paperwork together, line by line. Legal language, deadlines, court filing procedures. At some point, I signed my name, Malis Caldwell, in ink that didn't shake. For the first time, I wasn't surviving the story. I was telling it. As I was gathering my things to leave, my phone buzzed. A message. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. The photo loaded slowly. Zinnia. She was sitting on the curb, makeup smudged, her dress wrinkled, shoulders hunched, crying. The caption below was one sentence. "You broke her. Is that what you wanted?" I stared at it, my finger hovering. And for a second, I almost believed it was my fault. Until I remembered everything she took from me. 1 week after everything detonated, I sat in Lior's office in downtown San Francisco. It was early, barely 9, but the room already buzzed with quiet energy. Legal pads were stacked neatly, 2 pens laid in parallel, like everything needed to happen in clean lines now. Lior looked at me as I signed the final page of the complaint. "Credit abuse, identity misuse, inheritance manipulation," he read aloud, almost like reciting a prayer. "You sure?" "My hands aren't shaking, are they?" I said. He smiled, clipped and professional. "Not even a little." Outside the window, the city moved as if it had no idea what had happened, as if Vera Caldwell's name hadn't just been flagged in a formal legal filing, as if Dorian Caldwell's financial empire wasn't about to be dissected in public court. By noon, the story had leaked. "Daughter of prominent educator sues for inheritance fraud," read one headline. "San Francisco family implodes over secret trust battle," read another. Vera's charity galas began to fall off community calendars. Dorian's name vanished from 2 real estate boards. Their world didn't crumble in fire. It wilted in the quiet. like something left too long in the sun. That evening, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by soft music and overdue stillness. My plants had started to droop, neglected through days of war, but they were still alive. I watered them slowly, one by one. The mint plant I kept for tea, the snake plant from an old colleague, the fiddle leaf that refused to die, no matter how many times I forgot to feed it. As I tossed the empty watering can into the sink, I remembered the wedding gift from Dorian. I hadn't opened it, not really. It sat on the entry table, untouched, wrapped in heavy gold foil. I slid it open with a letter opener. No card. Just a typed summary inside an envelope. $200 in unpaid bills, utilities and storage units, linked to a property I'd never lived in. A single line was scribbled at the bottom. Since you're doing so well. That was always his way. Guilt as gratitude, debt as acknowledgement. I slipped the document into my legal binder and noted it under retaliation. Then I opened my phone and quietly removed myself from the family group chat. No farewell, no announcement, just delete. Later, I sat by the window with a journal open across my lap. Not a fancy leather-bound one. Just a cheap spiral notebook with the date written at the top. They thought silence meant weakness, I wrote. But silence taught me when to strike. That's what they never understood. I wasn't their failure. I was their reckoning. As the city lights flickered to life outside, my phone buzzed once more. A new notification from the court system. Dorian Caldwell has filed a countersuit, alleging defamation and emotional damage. I exhaled. Not in surprise. Not even in frustration. Of course he did, I murmured. 2 weeks passed like a slow exhale. The chaos had dulled. Reporters moved on. The social media hashtags cooled. Even the neighbors stopped pretending they hadn't seen it all unfold. In the quiet aftermath, life returned to its regular rhythm. But it wasn't the same rhythm as before. Not for me. One morning, I found a letter on my doorstep. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Vera's cursive was still elegant, unnervingly neat, as if she believed presentation could redeem content. I opened it at the kitchen counter. "You've made your point," the letter read, "but family matters shouldn't go public. Please stop before this gets worse." No apology, no recognition of what she'd done. Just a warning wrapped in soft language. She wasn't trying to reach me. She was trying to put the mask back on. I folded the letter and slid it into the recycling bin. No drama, no tears. Just a simple refusal to carry it forward. At Lior's office the next day, he offered mediation options. "We can try settlement if you want to minimize exposure," he said gently. I shook my head. You don't negotiate with people who only want to silence you. At the courthouse, I walked past Vera and Dorian in the hallway. They stood near a bench, whispering. When Vera saw me, she turned slightly, just enough to avoid my eyes. Dorian didn't even try. For once, they had nothing to say. Back home, I stared at my phone for a long moment before tapping the voicemail icon. Zinnia's message sat unopened, time-stamped from 4 days ago. I didn't listen to it. I deleted it without hesitation. Later that night, I pulled out an old flash drive and opened a home video from when we were kids. The screen flickered to life with grainy footage. Zinnia's 8th birthday party. Balloons, cupcakes, paper crowns. And in the background, a 5-year-old version of me, twirling alone in the corner while everyone else sang around her. That's who I'd been fighting for. Not the version of me who learned how to survive their neglect, but the one who hadn't learned yet. The one who still danced, hoping someone would notice. I opened my journal and wrote, I didn't win because they lost. I won because I stopped needing their permission to exist. That sentence sat with me, like truth often does. Quiet, but undeniable. That same week, I began working on something new. A resource guide for adult children estranged from abusive families. A place to find language for what we couldn't name. A place where silence wasn't the price of peace. I called it The Uninvited. As I stapled the first few pages together, a knock came at the door. The mail carrier handed me a certified envelope. My name, typed. The sender, Trust Estate Office, Bayview Legal. I opened it at the table, tea still steaming beside me. The first line read, "After recent developments and submission of new evidence, the Estate Review Board has determined that the original will shall be reinstated." I froze. The one thing they fought hardest to keep was finally coming back to me. The courtroom smelled like paper and polished wood. I walked in wearing a dark suit, not to hide, not to blend in, but because it felt like armor. Vera sat at the far end, her posture tight, lips drawn thin. Dorian looked smaller than I remembered, his usual smugness replaced by a stiffness that no amount of cologne could mask. I didn't look at them when I sat down. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a voice that cut clean, shuffled her notes before speaking. Based on documentation, testimony, and submission of the original will, the trust estate shall revert to its originally intended heir, Malus Caldwell. Silence. Vera closed her eyes, not in grief, but in calculation. Dorian opened his mouth, a protest forming, but the judge raised a hand. "Mr. Caldwell, we are not debating facts today." I stood, slowly, my movements deliberate. The room felt smaller than when I'd entered, but I felt larger. Outside, reporters waited. Microphones rose like blades when I stepped out. One shouted, "Ms. Caldwell, do you feel vindicated?" I stopped walking just long enough to answer. They fought to erase me, but I was written into this legacy long before they tried. I didn't stay for more questions. As I descended the courthouse steps, Zinnia appeared, hair disheveled, tears barely dried. She pushed through the crowd. "You ruined everything," she hissed. "Are you happy?" I looked at her, really looked at her. "No," I said. "I'm not happy. I'm finally whole." And I kept walking. 1 month later, I launched the project, an online platform for people like me, those exiled by their own blood, gaslit into silence. I called it Unwritten Heirs. It wasn't about revenge, it was about voice. A week after the launch, the New York Times published a piece titled, "When Silence Isn't Golden." My name was in the byline, not as the subject, as the author. I visited my grandfather's grave the following Sunday. The wind was gentle, the sky quiet. I placed a small stone on his marker and whispered, "They buried the truth." But it grew anyway. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. Back at home, a letter waited. It was from the court. A check enclosed. Restitution, back interest, damages. It came with no apology, only a number. I deposited it the same day and wrote a new check of my own. This one was made out to a small nonprofit that offered scholarships to young women who'd aged out of foster care. On the memo line, I wrote, "In honor of those who were never named." That night, I walked through my apartment, bare feet brushing against warm hardwood. I passed by the bookshelf, where a framed clipping from the Times stood upright. I paused and looked at it. "They thought they raised a compliant daughter," I said aloud, "but they raised a woman who rewrote the ending. Hi, my name's Leora, and when I was 17, my parents left me at a highway rest stop with $5 and a note that said, 'Character is built when no one's watching.' They called it a joke, a lesson. But that lesson didn't end at the rest stop. They erased me from the will. They rewrote the story. They even tried to sue me for not loving them enough. I kept quiet for years. But what happens when the silence becomes their weapon? And the truth is, the only thing you have left. Would you speak up?" The wind barely pushed through the cracked windows of the Camry, the air inside thick with heat and words no one was saying out loud. My headphones were in, but nothing was playing. I just needed the illusion that I couldn't hear them. Mom tapped her nails against the console, a rhythm that always meant she was waiting for someone, usually me, to mess up. Dad gripped the steering wheel like it might float away if he let go. And in the front passenger seat, Marjorie flipped through her psychology textbook like it was gospel. She didn't glance back at me. She never really did. We were somewhere past Rifle, Colorado, pushing west on I-70, supposedly on our way back from Marjorie's campus tour. But I'd stopped keeping track of the route miles ago. The silence in that car had a weight to it, like wet clothes you couldn't take off. "Quick stop," Dad muttered. No one asked if I needed anything. He just pulled into the nearest rest area, dust flying off the pavement as we parked near the vending machines. There was nothing around but trees and cracked concrete. The place looked abandoned, like even the squirrels had decided to move on. I pulled my headphones off. "Bathroom break?" Mom turned in her seat, smiling that smile she saved for company and passive-aggressive conversations. "Why don't you grab us something cold, sweetie? A soda for your dad. Water for me." I didn't argue. I knew better. The minute you questioned anything in that car, the tone changed. It always started with disappointment, then spiraled into guilt. So I stepped out into the heat, grabbed my wallet from my hoodie pocket, and walked to the machines. The sun was brutal. My shoes stuck slightly to the asphalt with each step. I shoved a crumpled 5 into the slot, punched in the codes, and waited while the machine groaned like it was doing me a personal favor. The soda dropped with a clunk. The water, slower. I turned back toward the car and froze. There was no car, just empty space where it had been. No tire screech. No goodbye. Nothing. At first, I thought maybe they'd pulled around back. Or maybe Dad had gotten mad about something and was doing one of his dramatic loops. I walked forward, scanning the edges of the lot. Nothing but the buzz of insects and the occasional sound of a semi-truck passing far off. My phone buzzed. From Mom. Message: "Let's see how you get home. Don't call anyone. Learn something." My stomach dropped so fast, I thought I might vomit. I tried calling her. Straight to voicemail. Dad's number? Same. I tried again, and again. Each time, the line cut out like it couldn't be bothered. I looked around. The lot was still empty, the quiet growing louder with every second. A man in a truck glanced over. Too long. I backed up quickly, clutching the soda bottle like it could protect me. The heat pressed against me, thick and unmoving. I walked back toward the vending machines, my heart pounding, not knowing what the hell to do next. And then I saw it, taped to the side of the soda machine. A yellow post-it, slightly curled from the sun. $5. Don't waste it. Same handwriting as the notes she used to leave on my lunch napkins in middle school. Back when I still thought she was the kind of mom who would come through if things got bad enough. I didn't sit down. I couldn't. If I stopped moving, I might lose whatever hold I had left on the tiny sliver of control still inside me. My phone showed 17% battery, no charger, no backup. Just me in the middle of nowhere, with $5 and no one waiting for me anywhere. I tried to remember where the nearest bus stop might be. Maybe Glenwood, maybe Rifle. I wasn't even sure which direction we'd come from. The tears threatened, but I bit them back. This wasn't the first time they'd played a lesson on me, but it was the first time it felt this real, this final. "Maybe I deserved this," I whispered. A truck pulled in. Another guy, early 40s, glanced my way. My pulse kicked into overdrive. I ducked behind the machines, trying to look invisible. They left me. I kept repeating that in my head. They left me, not by accident, not out of anger. They did it, to see what I'd do. The vending machine hummed behind me. My fingers clenched the bottle so hard it warped under my grip. I didn't cry. Not yet. Crying was something you did when you believed someone might care. I looked out at the parking lot. Still empty, still hot. If this was their idea of love, of guidance, I wanted no part of it. If this was love, I didn't want it. But I didn't get to choose love, not when it was wired into me like survival. That memory, the heat, the silence, the sound of my footsteps on gravel as I walked back toward nothing, it stayed lodged behind my ribs like a shard of glass. Over the years, I trained myself not to pick at it, not to let it cut me open again. But it never dissolved. It just sat there, quietly reminding me where the line was drawn. Late last night, I was sorting through a drawer I hadn't opened in years, looking for a replacement charger, of all things. What I found instead was a notebook from college, tucked behind old receipts and half-dried pens. Wedged between the pages was a photo, me and Marjorie, taken just a few weeks before the test. She had her arm around me. My face was soft, still clinging to the idea that she might actually care. I stared at that picture for a long time. Then I flipped it over. No caption. Just a smudge of ink, like someone had started to write something and thought better of it. And then it hit me. The exact second I remembered her face at the rest stop. Not a look of surprise when Dad told me to grab drinks. Not a trace of confusion when I walked off toward the machines. No hesitation. Just a smirk. Barely there, but clear now. As if she already knew what was about to happen and had decided to enjoy the show. It wasn't a test, it was theater. And I was the punchline. The next time I saw her was 5 years later at Thanksgiving. The whole family had gathered at my aunt's house outside Boulder. By then, I had a job, a shared apartment, and had mastered the art of not bringing anything real to the table, emotionally or otherwise. Dinner was winding down. People were laughing over pie. That's when Wendell, my father, lifted his wine glass and said, "Remember Leora's big independence lesson?" I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. Marjorie's eyes lit up. "Oh, you mean the $5 drop-off?" She chuckled. She made it home with more dignity than change. Isn't that something? The room burst into laughter. My aunt elbowed me gently. "You were always such a resilient little thing." I chewed slowly, swallowed. Let the burn settle in my chest. I could have said something right then. I could have flipped the table. But I just nodded like they'd earned the right to laugh. Like it was somehow noble to be turned into a cautionary tale at dessert. I stayed quiet through the rest of the night, helped wash dishes, hugged people goodbye. I even thanked Mom for the sweet potatoes. Then I went home and deleted every photo I had of that night. That was the last family event I ever attended. From that point on, I began collecting, not souvenirs, but proof. Screenshots of texts, voicemails that went from sweet to manipulative, casual slips in conversations where they told people they'd tough-loved me into greatness. Every piece went into a folder on a drive I kept encrypted, labeled simply, "Just in case." I wasn't angry, not then. I was just preparing, quietly building the only kind of armor they couldn't see. Back in my apartment today, I looked at that photo one more time. Marjorie's smirk, my soft face, the before and after of trust. Then I tapped and held, delete. A simple act, no rage, no ceremony. If history is written by the loudest voice, then I guess it's time I started speaking up. And if they didn't want their version questioned, maybe they should have thought twice before laughing at mine. I closed my laptop and walked across the studio to the archive shelves tucked into the back wall. It was quiet. Mid-morning, slow traffic outside. Just the faint buzz of my assistant humming to herself in the front office. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just needed to move my hands, sift through something physical, something I could control. My fingers grazed a napkin folded neatly between two leather-bound design journals. I recognized the print right away. Diner style, cheap and soft. There was a grease stain on one corner and a ballpoint scrawl on the back. "Come back soon, sweetheart. Be safe." My throat tightened, not from emotion, but from the flood of memory that came rushing up too fast. I was 17, stiff from walking, shoes cutting into my heels, skin sunburned in patches. The vending machines had spit out 2 bottles for $5. No change, of course, and I hadn't had the nerve to ask anyone for help. Not at first. I walked alongside the road until the shoulder widened enough to feel like a choice instead of a punishment. After a few miles, I reached a gas station where I asked to use the bathroom and bought a bottle of water with my last coins. I lingered outside, pretending to wait for someone. I told the attendant my parents were running late. I remember him squinting at me, his lips tightening like he knew I was lying, but he didn't press. Just past 9 p.m., a woman pulled in driving a dented blue pickup. She was older, maybe late 40s, wearing a name tag that read Peggy. I didn't even ask. She took one look at me, leaned out her window, and said, "You look like you could use a booth and a hot plate." I nodded, got in, never looked back. She dropped me at a diner near Rifle, told me she'd be back for the late shift after 2 a.m. I sat in a corner booth, and the waitress, same age, same energy, gave me a sandwich without asking if I could pay. When I tried to explain, she just waved it off and said, "Don't worry about it. Happens more than you think." I didn't sleep much that night, but the vinyl booth was soft enough, and I kept my head down. I told the waitress my parents were nearby. "They're just arguing. I didn't want to be in the way." She nodded like she'd heard that before. I don't think she believed me, but she let me be. By sunrise, I'd mapped out a plan on the back of a napkin. How to get to Glenwood, which buses ran where, and what I could possibly do to buy myself more time. I never called anyone. I didn't cry. I carried the shame like a secret badge, something sharp and folded, hidden in the lining of my jacket. The napkin I held now, years later in my office, was the same one I'd used to map my escape. I'd kept it all this time without even knowing. I slid it gently into a file labeled Personal Reference and stood still for a moment, breathing in the quiet. The weight of old things can surprise you. Eventually, I returned to my desk, where renderings for a new cafe design waited on my screen. My studio had grown slowly, from redesigns in local bakeries to full build-outs for clients who didn't blink at five-figure invoices. No loans, no co-signers, no family funds. No one helped me, but no one stood in my way either. And that had been enough. Until Marjorie came through the studio doors like nothing had ever happened. It was 4 years ago, late summer. She wore a blazer that screamed tenure track, and her eyes scanned the space like she was judging a model home. She didn't say, "Congratulations." She didn't say, "Sorry." She said, "Wow, you really made something out of that, huh?" I raised an eyebrow. "Out of what?" "That little test," she said, like it was a shared memory. "Dad's idea. $5 and a life lesson." My face didn't move, but I felt something click. She wasn't ashamed. She wasn't trying to apologize. She was proud. "You think that was character building?" I asked quietly. She shrugged. "I mean, look at you, independent, successful. You should be thanking him." I almost laughed. Instead, I gestured to the door. "Some of us build alone, others just supervise." She left without another word. That night, I created a new folder. This one wasn't called Just in Case. It was labeled Proof They Always Knew. Inside, I added every piece of correspondence that hinted at their knowledge, their planning, their twisted pride. I created a document, blank but titled, The Beginning of My Side of the Story, and I saved it with a single keystroke, knowing I wasn't quite ready to write it yet, but I would be soon. The next morning, while sipping lukewarm coffee at my desk, my assistant poked her head into my office. Her voice was careful, like she was trying not to disturb a sleeping animal. "There's a woman named Delilah asking if you're available to meet. Says it's urgent." I didn't look up right away. I just closed the folder on my screen, Proof They Always Knew, and took a slow breath. "Did she give a last name?" She said she didn't need to. Of course she did. 9 years. That's how long it had been since I'd heard my mother's voice. Not since she called to say, "You can't punish us forever. Eventually, you'll grow up and understand." Apparently, the growing up was one-sided. "Tell her I'm free in 30 minutes, I said, standing up and already reaching for the blazer hanging behind the door. When they arrived, yes, they both came, it wasn't with tears or regret. No shaky voices. No handwritten apology cards like the ones they used to send to church friends after public fights. No, Delilah walked in like she owned the room. Wendell followed, scanning the space like a man sizing up a business deal. "Wow," Delilah breathed. You've really done well for yourself. I didn't offer coffee. I didn't even gesture toward the chairs. They sat anyway. Wendell leaned back like he'd helped build this place. Impressive square footage. And the light. Just beautiful. I waited. Delilah smoothed the hem of her blazer. We were thinking, maybe it's time we started fresh, as a family. Fresh, I repeated. She nodded. You've built something amazing here. What if we contributed to the next phase? A shared space. Your work, our name. It'd be symbolic. Wendell chimed in. Legacy matters. Imagine our name on one of your properties. A family restoration project, you could say. I didn't answer. I just studied them. Their faces. The way Wendell's eyes flicked toward the glass trophy near the door. The way Delilah's hands hovered over her bag, like she might pull out a brochure. This wasn't a peace offering. This was a pitch. You know, Wendell added, smiling just enough, we gave you your first push. That rest stop, that was your origin story, wasn't it? It took everything in me not to laugh. He said it like he was proud, like ditching your daughter on the side of a highway with $5 and a vague sense of justice had been some brilliant parenting move. I kept my face still. Thanks for coming, I said, but I don't do retroactive partnerships, especially not ones rooted in guilt. Delilah's smile faltered. You're still angry. I'm not angry, I said calmly. I'm alert. They left a few minutes later. Not a slammed door, not a single insult. Just Wendell's final comment as they reached the elevator. Don't forget who taught you to survive. The next afternoon, I received an email. No subject line, just a scanned document. My name was not on the estate anymore. Delilah and Wendell had revised their will. Marjorie was listed. So was a family friend from church. Me? I was omitted due to sustained estrangement and failure to uphold relational support. I wasn't supposed to see it. But someone, I still don't know who, sent it to me from a masked email. They'd already written me out. Now they were just making it official. I didn't cry. There wasn't a dramatic moment where I slid to the floor, gasping like the heroine in a made-for-TV movie. Instead, I opened a new folder on my desktop, in case they try again. Inside, I started logging everything. The visit, the pitch, the estate change, copies of client contracts they might try to tie themselves to. I knew how they operated. They didn't fight fair, they rewrote. That evening, I dialed my lawyer. This isn't about inheritance, I told him. It's about narrative. Let's talk about reputation clauses. He didn't even ask for clarification. You ready to draw a line? I looked at the screen still glowing in front of me. My name, my company, my work. All of it built from the ashes of that $5 lesson. No, I said. I'm ready to carve it in stone. The following Thursday, just after I wrapped a design consult with a local bookstore, my phone buzzed with a Google alert. I was walking to my car, still half thinking about shelving dimensions and vintage light fixtures, when the headline hit me like a slap. Daughter abandons aging parents after fame and fortune. Subheadline, we raised her right. We just didn't realize she'd rewrite the truth. The article wasn't from a major outlet, just a blog, one of those community-run sites with too many ads and a comment section full of retirees, conspiracy theorists, and well-meaning strangers. But the reach wasn't the problem. It was what it said. They painted me as a selfish opportunist, a once troubled teen who had been rescued by loving, strict parents, only to toss them aside the moment she made a name for herself. After all we did for her, the article quoted, supposedly from Delilah, she cut us off. Cold. No calls, no birthdays, just a wall. The part that stunned me the most wasn't the lie. It was how well written the lie was. Polished. Strategic. It was clear. They didn't just want to discredit me. They wanted to replace my version with theirs. By the time I pulled into the garage, my inbox was a battlefield. Emails from local partners asking for clarification, a canceled meeting, Even my assistant had texted, "Let me know if you want me to pull our brand mentions off the main page until this blows over." I didn't respond. I needed a moment to breathe, to think before I spoke. That had always been the difference between me and them. I waited. I didn't flail. I calculated. By nightfall, the blog post had been reshared over a dozen times in community forums and small business Facebook groups. People who'd never met me had formed opinions about me. Ungrateful. Typical millennial. Another narcissist built by TikTok hustle culture. And then, nestled in the middle of the pile, was a comment from someone I vaguely remembered from high school. Didn't her parents abandon her at a rest stop or something? Reply: No, that was a misunderstanding. It was a teaching moment. Kids today are so dramatic. I stared at that screen until my eyes burned. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But I opened my social app and started typing. Then I stopped, deleted it, typed again, paused. Finally, I posted this. I was left at a rest stop with $5. I didn't forget. They just assumed I would stay quiet. That was it. No hashtags, no dramatic punctuation, just truth, undecorated. The response was slow at first. A few likes. One heart. Then the messages started. Some were kind. A few were people who knew the family, who apologized for staying silent. One message came from a woman who used to teach Sunday school at our old church. I knew something wasn't right back then. I'm sorry I didn't say anything. Another from a cousin. If you need someone to speak up, I will. You were always the strong one, even when we didn't deserve your strength. But for every voice of support, there was someone parroting the lie. Sounds like someone's bitter they didn't get their inheritance. Maybe she just hates being held accountable. So dramatic. Who leaves a kid with only $5? That's ridiculous. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so infuriating. I was ready for the noise. What I wasn't expecting was the envelope that arrived the next day. A courier dropped it off at the front desk of my studio. Inside, a formal cease and desist from Delilah and Wendell's attorney. The letter accused me of defamation, emotional manipulation, and intentional character sabotage. I read it twice, then set it down without blinking. My lawyer called an hour later. Want to respond now, or wait until they escalate? I smiled for the first time in days. Oh, we're not responding. We're preparing. I forwarded him the blog post, the screenshots, the comment threads. I added a copy of the letter to the In Case They Try Again folder, now bloated with layers of their orchestrated truth. This wasn't about who had the louder voice anymore. It was about who had the receipts. I wasn't angry in the way people expect. No shouting, no slamming doors. My rage was cold, organized, labeled, cross-referenced, and I wasn't waiting to be rescued. I was building my case, line by line. They had taught me how to endure, but I had taught myself how to speak. And this time, I wasn't staying quiet. He didn't realize. This wasn't me making a mistake. This was me marking the line they'd already crossed. The next morning, just after 8 a.m., Mia came into my office carrying a slim stack of printed pages. Her eyes said more than her mouth ever could. She placed them on my desk without a word, and just stood there, arms crossed, lips tight. I picked up the first page and scanned it. Fabricated emails. Dozens of them. Sent from fake accounts using variations of my name. Messages laced with profanity and threats, addressed to clients, collaborators, even a vendor I'd only spoken to once. Some claimed I'd refused to pay invoices. One said I berated an elderly customer in front of staff. None of it was true. Then came the Yelp reviews, anonymous, but strategically timed. One claimed I'd verbally assaulted my aging mother in public. Another accused me of exploiting trauma for profit. It was too calculated to be coincidence. I looked up. When did these start going out? Mia replied, 3 days ago, but yesterday's batch hit harder. Someone copied your exact email signature and CC'd our company account. One of our investors flagged it this morning. I thanked her and told her to call IT. By 9:30, I had my head of security and our lead tech on a video call. We dug into IP origins, headers, server trails. Most were routed through VPNs, but a few slipped, careless, maybe rushed. 2 messages came from an IP address linked to a residential Comcast account in Fort Collins, my parents' house. I didn't call them, I didn't send a text. Instead, I clicked open my legal folder, made a new subfile titled Digital Defamation, and began uploading everything. They didn't want peace. They wanted control. And now, they were pushing into a space I'd built with my own breath, trying to poison it from the inside. They thought I'd freeze, that I'd stay quiet, that I'd protect them again. But that version of me was long gone. I pulled a storage box from my bottom drawer. Inside, sealed in a weathered envelope, was the vending machine receipt from that day. The day they left me. Yellowed edges. A light crease down the middle. On the back, still legible in her handwriting. $5. Don't screw it up. I hadn't shown that to anyone. Until now. I scanned both sides, saved the file under a new label. Origins. It was more than a receipt. It was the first record in a timeline of erasure. Proof that they hadn't just abandoned me. They'd documented it like a joke. My lawyer called that afternoon. I forwarded the fake emails, screenshots, and the Yelp links. Within 2 hours, he sent back a draft of our response. Cease and desist. Formal accusation of reputational sabotage. Defamation with intent to damage business interests. He asked if I wanted to review it before sending. No, I said. Make it public. Let them see what lines look like when they're written in legal ink. He didn't flinch. You know this is going to escalate. I'm counting on it. We filed the letter by 5 p.m. That evening, I stayed at the office. I wasn't hiding. I was anchoring. This was my ground, my building, my name on the wall. Around 9 p.m., my phone buzzed. Voicemail. I didn't recognize the number, but something in my gut knew. I hit play. Wendell's voice came through, hoarse and slurred. He sounded like he was halfway through a bottle and not planning to stop. You think this ends with a letter? He said. You think dragging us into court makes you the hero? There was a pause. Breathing. A muttered curse I couldn't make out. You've made a mistake, Leora. You're not as untouchable as you think. Then the line went dead. I listened again, this time with less emotion. The voice I used to shrink under had lost its weight. I forwarded the message to my lawyer, added a copy to the folder, and then, for the first time in months, I turned off the office lights and drove home with the windows down. The air wasn't clean, but it was mine. The air was still sharp from the drive home. I hadn't turned on music, no distractions, just the hum of tires on pavement and that voicemail echoing in my head like a warning I'd already outgrown. The next morning, I arrived at the courthouse early. Black pantsuit, hair pinned back, no makeup beyond the essentials. This wasn't about performance, it was about record. When I stepped inside, the building felt colder than usual. Not in temperature, more in tone, like even the walls were holding their breath. My lawyer met me near security with a quiet nod. No small talk, no posturing. We filed the case just after 9 a.m. Leora Ray vs. Delilah and Wendell Ray charges. Defamation. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Business interference. Online identity manipulation. By noon, the court docket was public, and within hours, the vultures started circling. Local outlets picked it up first, then blogs. Then someone on Twitter made a thread dissecting every scrap of online mess tied to my name for the past 6 months. All the fake emails, the timing of the Yelp reviews, the anonymous interviews in parenting forums. It unraveled quickly. And of course, Delilah and Wendell had a counter-move ready. That night, a glossy article hit the front page of a local magazine. When families fracture, a heartbroken mother's plea for peace, the cover photo was staged. Delilah seated at a garden table, holding a coffee mug like it weighed 10 pounds. Wendell behind her, hand on her shoulder, like they'd been living in a Hallmark card. The interview was everything I expected. Quotes about unconditional love, about daughters forgetting where they came from. Wendell said, "We never raised our voices. All we ever asked for was respect." Then came Marjorie, on livestream. The same sister who smirked at the rest stop, who praised the lesson years later. "She always misunderstood us," she said smoothly. "Our parents did the best they could. They gave her structure. She turned that into resentment." People ate it up. The wounded daughter versus well-meaning parents narrative. Clean, convenient, familiar. But I didn't flinch. I didn't even respond, not directly. Instead, my legal team posted a link to a Dropbox folder labeled, "The Story They Never Told." Inside were 4 files. File 1, a scanned vending machine receipt, dated, timestamped, location tagged. File 2, a screenshot of a text from Delilah, years later. "Let's see how long it takes you to get home. Don't call your aunt." File 3, property records for my studio, every penny documented, no cosigners, no family help. File 4, the video. Wendell, sitting in a folding chair at a barbecue, red Solo cup in hand. A friend behind the camera asking, "So what happened with Leora again?" He laughs, slaps his knee. "Left her with $5 and a soda. Told her to figure it out. Best damn parenting move I ever made. That shut her up real good for a while." Silence. Then laughter. He looks straight into the camera. "She'll thank me one day." The clip spread like wildfire. By the following afternoon, hashtags started showing up. $5 daughters, just character building, gone wrong. Taught, not loved. People started writing in. My inbox, once full of sponsorships and contracts, became a landing pad for stories. A teacher who was forced to walk home in the rain for forgetting her trumpet. A nurse whose dad locked her out for being 5 minutes late. A grandmother who still remembered being left at a bus station in '64. Not everyone believed me, but enough did. Support poured in, not with pity, but with recognition. Then my lawyer called again. "They've filed a new claim, counter-lawsuit, citing filial responsibility." I almost laughed. "Let me guess, emotional abandonment?" "Exactly. They're alleging neglect of parental care in their senior years." Of course they were. They couldn't win by narrative. So they pivoted to legality. But what they didn't realize was this. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was leading. "Perfect," I said. "Let's put it all on record." He paused. "You sure?" "They wanted to use law like a club. I'll use it like a scalpel." That night, I poured myself a glass of water, walked out onto my balcony, and stared out over Denver. Neon signs blinking in the distance, horns echoing low from a nearby freeway. I wasn't just fighting for me anymore. I was fighting for every daughter who was told that abandonment was a lesson, that silence was strength, that bruises were blessings in disguise. The truth wasn't just mine. It belonged to all of us. The sky was already beginning to turn when I got the call from my attorney. His voice was steady, but there was a tightness behind it, one I'd come to recognize over the years. The kind of tone people use when they're trying to tell you something ugly without making it sound dramatic. "They've filed the suit," he said. "Of course they did," I replied, pulling off the freeway and into the courthouse parking lot. "What's the angle?" "Colorado's filial responsibility clause. They're framing it as abandonment of duty, emotional and financial neglect of elderly parents. That's their claim." I let out a short breath through my nose. Not quite a laugh, not quite disbelief, just confirmation. This wasn't new ground for them. It was just a new costume. By the time I walked into the courtroom the next morning, the press had already arrived. Not many. Just enough to remind me that whatever happened inside wouldn't stay there for long. Delilah and Wendell sat at the plaintiff's table like a couple from a retirement home brochure. Soft pastels, hands folded, eyes downcast. The performance was meticulous. Wendell wore reading glasses he didn't need. Delilah dabbed at her eyes with a tissue before court was even in session. And then there was Marjorie. She didn't come to the courthouse, not physically, but her words were there, printed, distributed, and reshared. A letter on Medium. A headline that read, "When forgiveness is impossible, a sister speaks out." She wrote, "Leora's turned our family's quiet dysfunction into a public circus. She's monetized pain, rewritten memory, and abandoned people who only tried to shape her into someone strong enough for the world." The comments were mixed. Some praised her honesty. Others called it damage control. But the one that kept resurfacing said simply, "Imperfect parents don't leave kids on highways." That morning in court, I didn't bring a speech. I didn't practice lines. I brought facts. When it was time to testify, I stood slowly. Not timid, not bold, just grounded. "I'm not here to debate philosophy," I began. "This case isn't about whether parents are allowed to make mistakes. This is about rewriting guilt into law." I felt every pair of eyes in the room. They didn't raise me, they trained me, they tested me, and when I passed, when I survived, they claimed credit for the scars. I handed over exhibits, emails connecting them to the online defamation, a scan of the vending machine receipt with Delilah's note on the back, screenshots of texts discouraging me from asking extended family for help, a notarized statement from a therapist outlining the emotional pattern of coercive parenting, and finally, the video. Wendell laughing about the $5 drop-off, calling it the best move I ever made. It played for the room in silence. No soundtrack, no explanation. Just his voice, his words, his pride. I didn't look at my parents while it played. I looked at the judge. When the video ended, I closed the file gently. My parents didn't ask me to be kind. They demanded silence, and when I stopped giving them that, they called it betrayal. The courtroom was still when I sat down. The ruling came 2 days later. The court finds no legal basis to impose financial or emotional obligation upon the defendant. This is not a case of neglect. It is a dispute grounded in emotional history, not legal failure. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. I didn't stop. I didn't speak. That night, I posted a single sentence to my account. "Closure isn't peace, but it's a place to rest." The likes came fast. Then comments. Then DMs from strangers saying, "Thank you for saying what I couldn't." And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I had to reply. I didn't owe anyone a follow-up or a headline or an apology for surviving out loud. I stood in my kitchen, barefoot, holding a mug of tea gone cold, watching the sun dip past the rooftops. It wasn't joy, it wasn't relief, it was just stillness, and sometimes that's the closest thing to healing we ever get. And this time, I'm not looking back. I hadn't driven that stretch of I-70 in nearly 2 decades, not because I couldn't, but because I wouldn't. Some roads leave more than tire marks, but on a cool, wind-bitten morning in late October, I turned the ignition, pulled onto the highway, and pointed myself west. No music, just the rhythm of the road and the quiet, knowing that I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't chasing closure, I was carrying it. The trees lining the route were yellowing, rust-colored leaves skipping across the pavement like small truths finally catching wind. I passed Rifle, slowed near Glenwood, and eventually pulled into a gravel lot that looked both unfamiliar and exactly the same. The rest stop. It had been upgraded, barely. New paint, trash bins with lids that weren't duct-taped. The vending machines were updated, but the placement hadn't changed. They still sat on the left side of the building, near a picnic table that had once been my only company. But today, there was something new. A modest, clean shelter had been added. A small structure with open walls, a few benches, and a sign overhead. The return point. I stepped out of the car and walked slowly, heels crunching over leaves, until I stood in front of the kiosk. I didn't need to look around. No ghosts were waiting in the corners anymore. Just wind and sky and what I chose to bring with me. I reached into my coat pocket and ran my fingers across the edge of the folded deed. It was mine now. Legally, entirely. Purchased under a nonprofit initiative I had formed with quiet intent and no press release. The only press involved had come last week when a local newspaper stopped by to ask about the shelter. I had declined an interview. This isn't about me, I told them. It's about making sure someone else doesn't get left behind. I didn't mention the $5. I didn't mention the day. I didn't need to. Inside the shelter, there were small lockers for free hygiene kits, a map of public transportation lines, and vending machines that dispense snacks and bottled water. No payment required. Above one machine was a plaque that read, "For anyone who was left, may you find your way forward." I stood there for a long time, reading that sentence over and over. It wasn't meant to be poetic. It was just true. Footsteps behind me were soft, but I recognized them before I turned. Ramona. My aunt hadn't spoken to me since the court ruling. We'd exchanged a few messages, but nothing that felt like resolution. Still, there she was. Gray cardigan, hands folded in front of her, a worn envelope tucked under one arm. We didn't hug. She didn't cry. She simply walked up, placed the envelope on the bench near the vending machine, and sat down without a word. I followed. A few minutes passed before I reached for the envelope. Inside was a copy of the original complaint Delilah and Wendell had filed against me, now stamped in bold red, case dismissed. No note, no commentary, just the truth, handed back. Ramona didn't explain how she got it. I didn't ask. We sat quietly, letting the wind do the talking. Eventually, she glanced over. "I saw what you built here." I nodded. "It's good," she added. "It's right." That was all. No apologies. No retroactive defense. Just recognition. And sometimes that's the most someone can give when they weren't strong enough to fight for you before. We parted without ceremony. She headed toward her car. I stayed behind. There was one more thing I needed to do. I walked over to the stone slab near the edge of the lot, still cracked, still sitting just off the pavement like it had been waiting for something. I crouched down, reached into my purse, and pulled out a small folded bill. $5. I tucked it beneath the rock, not to honor the lesson, but to mark the distance between who I was and who I had become. No note, no explanation, just that simple offering. I stood, exhaled slowly, and walked back to my car. I didn't look back when I drove off. I didn't need to. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for someone to come back and say, "I'm sorry." I built a place where people could move forward without needing to hear it, and that, for me, was enough. Sometimes healing isn't about grand gestures or picture-perfect reunions. It's about reclaiming what was stolen: your voice, your dignity, your right to be the narrator of your own life. If you've ever been told to stay quiet, to be the bigger person, or that family is everything, even when that family hurt you, you're not alone. I spent years trying to earn love from people who saw me as a reflection of their control, not as a person. But survival taught me this: you don't owe anyone access to you just because you share DNA. Your peace is not selfish. Your boundaries are not betrayal. And walking away doesn't make you cold. It makes you brave. Now I want to ask you, have you ever had to choose distance over connection for the sake of your own mental and emotional safety? Have you ever been made to feel guilty for protecting your peace? Drop a 1 in the comments if this story hit home for you, or tell me where you're watching from. I love knowing how far these stories travel. And if you didn't connect with this video, I'm open to hearing that too. What didn't work for you? What would you like to see more of? And if you're still with me, thank you. Truly. If this story moved you or reminded you of your own journey, I hope you'll subscribe to the channel so you won't miss what's next. I share stories like this to remind people that survival is not the end. Sometimes it's just the beginning. See you in the next story. Hi, I'm Venitra. On Christmas Eve, I walked into my parents' house and saw something missing: my face, cropped cleanly out of the family portrait above the fireplace like I was never part of it. They called me just the guest, but the gifts under the tree were bought with my money. The purse my sister opened with fake surprise, charged to my account. No one looked ashamed. No one even looked surprised. So I gave them an envelope. Inside, everything they tried to erase. What happens when the daughter they edited out decides to edit herself back in? On her own terms? And what do you do when silence stops being protection and starts being a weapon? The tires crunched against the frozen gravel as I pulled into the driveway. The house looked exactly the same. Same string lights wrapping the porch columns, same red wreath on the door, and the same curtain pattern I'd memorized as a child. But stepping out of the car, I felt none of the warmth those memories used to bring. Snow clung to the soles of my boots as I crossed the walkway. The scent of pine and cinnamon drifted from inside, mingling with the distant sound of holiday jazz. It should have felt comforting, nostalgic even. Instead, it was like slipping into a costume that no longer fit. The front door opened before I could knock. Vervain stood there in her holiday sweater, a fixed smile stretching her face. "You made it," she said, stepping aside without a hug. Her perfume hit me instantly, floral, sharp, intentional. It smelled like cover-up. I walked in and scanned the foyer. The place had been redecorated again, everything curated, down to the angle of the throw pillows. The kind of home that looks perfect on Instagram but feels like a museum in real life. I moved toward the living room, shrugging off my coat. That's when I saw it. Above the fireplace, where our old family photo had always hung, was a newer, larger frame. The image was crisp, professionally done. Mother in her signature red blazer, Thorin beside her, with that forced half-smile, and Callista mid-laugh like someone had just told her a delightful joke. It was the kind of photo you'd use in a Christmas card campaign. But I wasn't in it. Not even off to the side, not blurred in the background. I had been edited out, cleanly. No jagged lines, no missing limbs in a poorly cropped mistake. Just gone. I stared at it for a long moment. No one said anything. No explanation followed. Not that I expected one. I let out a small breath and muttered, "Subtle." My voice didn't carry. That was fine. I dropped my overnight bag by the couch and sat back straight. The fireplace crackled softly. If I listened closely, I could almost hear the sound of my own absence echoing in that room. "You'll be sleeping in the guest room," Vervain called from the kitchen. "Not your room, not even the upstairs room. Guest." "Of course," I replied flatly. "Wouldn't want to take anyone's space." Thorin entered a moment later, barely looking up from his phone. "Traffic okay?" "It was fine," I said. That was the entire exchange. Then Callista came gliding in, her hair perfectly styled, holding a wine glass with a sprig of rosemary. "There she is," she sang, "all the way from Oregon. Welcome back to the nest." "The guest nest," I said, smiling without teeth. She giggled. "You know how Mom is with themes. Every room has one now. Yours is Scandinavian minimalism. Very crisp." "Minimalism suits me," I said, and no one caught the bite behind it. Dinner was announced like an event. Vervain had prepared Cornish game hens, roasted vegetables, and a quinoa salad, her usual showcase of domestic perfection. She gestured me toward a seat at the far end of the table, away from the centerpiece and directly under the vent. "Make yourself comfortable," she said, as if comfort had ever been an option. Callista led the toast, of course. Something about gratitude and family and cherishing every moment. I didn't raise my glass. I sipped slowly, watching their performances unfold like a well-rehearsed skit. Halfway through the meal, Vervain glanced over. "So good to have everyone here, even our guest from Oregon." The table laughed, lightly, politely. Callista winked. I froze. "Guest?" "Guest, huh?" I said, placing my fork down. "Good to know I should have booked a hotel." An awkward pause followed, broken only by the clink of Thorin's glass as he topped off his wine. No one apologized. No one corrected her. They weren't being careless. They were being clear. After dinner, I retreated to the guest room. It was exactly what you'd expect. Neutral colors, untouched linens, a scented candle already burning. The walls were bare. No sign that I'd ever lived in this house, ever laughed in its kitchen, ever cried in its halls. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the suitcase I hadn't unpacked. That photo above the fireplace wasn't an oversight. It was a statement. You don't belong here anymore. I lay back and stared at the ceiling fan, rotating in slow motion, each blade slicing the silence, like a clock hand counting down. They always said I was the strong one, the independent one. They built me that way, by forgetting birthdays, skipping recitals, losing track of where I lived or what I did. And I let them. I let them think I didn't need anything because I was tired of asking. Toni Morrison once wrote, "If you want to fly, you have to give up the things that weigh you down." I used to think she meant regrets. Now I think she meant people. And still, I stayed. One more night, one more chance. Even if deep down, I knew nothing would change. Morning sunlight filtered through the gauzy kitchen curtains, casting pale lines across the tile floor as I stepped into the dining room. The house was wide awake now, smelling of maple syrup and rosemary, sounding of cheerful jazz and polished laughter. The table was already set. Everything matched. Even the chaos here was curated. Callista stood near the buffet, barefoot in a silk robe like some lifestyle host giving tips for the perfect brunch setup. "These are homemade," she beamed, pointing to a plate of pancakes stacked like architecture. "Gluten-free, almond flour, local eggs. We've really elevated tradition." I glanced at the long table. Name cards marked every seat. Mom with a little holly leaf doodled on hers, Dad's printed in gold, and Callista's decorated with a glittery ribbon. There was one spot left. No card. Tucked in the far end, right near the back window where the draft slipped in from the old seal. I sat there without a word. Plates clinked. Chairs creaked. The two family friends invited for this picture-perfect holiday chatted animatedly with Callista about her trip to Tulum, her upcoming product line, and how her latest video had touched so many lives. I poured myself some coffee. No one noticed I hadn't eaten. A stack of gifts sat near the tree. As they were passed out, one box remained. Simple wrapping, no tag. Vervain picked it up and walked it over with a casual grace that said everything had been pre-planned. "We weren't sure you were coming," she said, her voice honey-sweet, "so we kept it neutral." I opened it slowly. Inside was a white ceramic mug. It read, in curling script, "Try not to take things personally." Callista burst out laughing. "That's hilarious," she said, turning to the others. "Come on, that's just funny." Even one of the guests chuckled politely. I looked at the mug, turned it once in my hands, then slid it back into the box. My face didn't move, but inside, I was archiving this moment, tucking it into the ever-expanding folder labeled Proof. I didn't respond. I didn't smile. I just made sure they saw me close the lid. We moved on. Conversations bloomed again, like nothing had happened. That's how these things go in families like ours. Someone plants a landmine, it explodes, and then everyone politely ignores the debris. Midway through brunch, another guest arrived. One of those distant friends of the family I hadn't seen since high school graduation. He was balding now, wearing an oversized coat and holding a bottle of sparkling cider. "Wow, it's been years," he said, greeting everyone warmly. When he reached me, he paused, visibly trying to place my face. "You must be Callista's cousin from out of town, right?" Vervain said nothing, just sipped her mimosa and pretended to be absorbed in slicing a scone. I smiled. Not the forced kind. The quiet, final kind. "No," I said evenly. "I'm the older daughter, the one they didn't label." His smile faltered. He nodded awkwardly and turned away. That was the moment it shifted. Not for them. For me. I wasn't speaking to be understood. I was speaking to confirm what I already knew. They didn't forget me. They erased me, and I'd finally stopped handing them the eraser. I excused myself from the table soon after, feigning fatigue. No one argued. Upstairs, I pushed open the door to what used to be my bedroom. It was now a makeshift storage space. Boxes of seasonal decor, a folded treadmill, and a few plastic bins labeled MISC lined the walls. The only remnant of my past was a small crack near the window pane, the one I used to trace with my finger when I couldn't sleep. I cleared a corner of the desk, set down my laptop, and opened a new folder on my desktop. I named it Reclaim. It wasn't poetic, but it was honest. One by one, I began pulling up old emails, financial statements, forgotten account notices, receipts I hadn't meant to ignore, but had. There were charges I didn't recognize, passwords I never changed, access logs that didn't match my own logins. I wasn't emotional, I was focused. Every detail I uncovered didn't surprise me, it confirmed me. And I realized something else. I wasn't here to heal a relationship. I was here to map a pattern. I wasn't looking for apologies anymore. I was collecting proof. Back downstairs, the air had changed. Brunch dishes were cleared, but the house remained frozen in its careful stillness. It wasn't quiet. Callista's voice still floated through the space, narrating her latest brand deal to whoever would listen. But something about the energy was sterile, like hospital lighting. Too bright, too controlled. I passed the coffee table on my way to the fireplace and paused. Someone had placed a photo album there, leather-bound, thick, like it had weight, both literal and symbolic. The kind you leave out casually for guests, hoping someone will say, "Oh, what a beautiful family." I sat down slowly, lifted the cover, and began flipping. Page after page of beaming faces. Christmas mornings, beach vacations, graduations, weddings. Not mine, of course. Everything looked curated, softened with filters or polished lighting. There were shots I recognized because I'd taken them, angles I'd framed, moments I'd paused time to preserve. But my face never appeared, not once. Not even in the background, not a blurred shoulder, not a misplaced hand. They hadn't just stopped including me. They had removed me, meticulously. I leaned back, let the album rest on my lap, and stared at the fireplace. It was still crackling gently, the way it always did. Familiar. Like it hadn't noticed anything had changed. I'd lived those years, but they'd edited them into a version where I didn't exist. Dinner prep began soon after. Callista buzzed around, placing name cards at each setting, her voice light and performative. I stayed seated, watching. There were names for everyone, even the family friend who dropped by for dessert. No card for me. Vervain walked past me, pausing briefly when she noticed my eyes following her. "You're fine there, sweetheart," she said, pointing to a chair near the swinging door to the kitchen, right next to the trash bin. "It's less crowded." It wasn't about space, it was about proximity, to power, to acknowledgement, to being part of the circle. I stood, took the card from Thorin's spot. He wasn't there yet, and moved it. Placed it at the end of the table. Sat down. No one said a word, which told me everything. After dinner, as the dishes were rinsed and dried in coordinated rhythm, I wandered into the den. It was quiet, dimly lit by a single floor lamp, dust motes floating lazily in the warm air. I opened a cabinet I hadn't touched in years. Inside, half buried under a stack of faded wrapping paper and a few tangled strings of lights, was a thumb drive labeled in Vervain's cursive, Family Archive. I took it upstairs, plugged it into my laptop. The folder opened to hundreds of images, scanned Polaroids, digitized VHS stills, and carefully organized year-by-year albums. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. As I clicked through, something eerie emerged. Photos I remembered taking were there. I recalled where I was standing, what I said to make them smile. But in the saved versions, I had been cropped out. Some of them so carefully edited, you'd think I never stood behind that lens. Even the captions, originally written in my messy script, had been retyped in Callista's chirpy tone. "Beach day with the best fam ever. Nothing like Mom's Christmas brunch." My words had been rewritten, my point of view replaced, my authorship deleted. I didn't disappear. They just reframed the story until I no longer fit. Back at the desk, I copied the entire drive onto my laptop, then a second copy onto the cloud, not out of spite, out of preservation. I wasn't trying to prove anything to them anymore, but I knew what families like mine did best: deny, delay, delete. So I documented. I went back into my folder, reclaim, and added new entries. Visual manipulation, album plus digital archive, timeline gaps. Emotional pattern, non-inclusion across events. Witnesses, passive observers, complicit in erasure. It wasn't about being petty, it was about patterns. This wasn't new behavior, it was just newly undeniable. Later that evening, I reviewed my old financial email again, this time with sharper eyes, timestamps, account pings, device activity. My digital footprint had been tampered with before. This was simply another layer. As I scrolled, I thought about how truth doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. In photos cropped without comment, in chairs placed near trash cans, in albums where you vanish frame by frame. I wasn't fighting a mistake. I was fighting a narrative. You can't challenge a story that doesn't include you, unless you write your own. Dinner came with the kind of presentation you see on cooking shows. Plates rimmed in gold, sprigs of rosemary tucked into folded napkins, Callista narrating each course like she was hosting a seasonal special. If anyone noticed I hadn't changed out of my jeans and sweater, they didn't mention it. The gift exchange started shortly after dessert. Callista insisted we open presents in order, which, unsurprisingly, meant she went first. With exaggerated grace, she tore into a box wrapped in deep burgundy foil. Inside, a designer handbag. One I recognized from a boutique window back in Portland. I remembered glancing at it once. Just once. She gasped theatrically. "Oh my God, you guys," she said, turning to Vervain and Thorin with that breathy, I'm so humbled smile. "This is... wow!" Vervain reached out to squeeze her hand. "We thought it was time you had something special." Thorin nodded, sipping wine. The moment lingered like they expected applause. Then a small paper slipped from the box. A folded receipt. I leaned forward just enough to catch it before it touched the floor. Unfolded it. Stared. My name, my bank, my card. They'd used my money. I turned the slip toward the light. Double-checked the date. Recent. Less than 3 weeks ago. While I was paying rent and skipping groceries, they were swiping my card for Callista's photo op accessory. No one made eye contact. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam the paper down. I just said, steady as a lawyer in closing argument, "Funny, I didn't know I was still your bank." Callista didn't even blink. "Don't make this about you. You weren't even using that card." Vervain gave a small laugh. "It's Christmas, Venitra. Let's not ruin it." I folded the receipt in half, then in half again, and tucked it into my back pocket. "Don't worry, I'm not the one ruining anything." Later that night, after the laughter had moved into the other room, I found myself in the kitchen alone. The sink had been cleaned. The candles were out, but the trash hadn't been taken out yet. I opened the lid. Among the wrappers and paper towels were torn pieces of other receipts. I started pulling them out, assembling the puzzle on the granite countertop like I'd done this before, which in a way I had. Charges to stores I'd never visited, brands I'd never worn, gifts I'd never given, but apparently had funded. All linked to my secondary account, one I'd given Vervain access to years ago during a medical scare. I'd forgotten to revoke it. They hadn't. I took photos of each piece, smoothing the crumpled bits flat and capturing every line item. Then I placed them in an envelope, sealed it, and wrote one word on the front. Evidence. I didn't need revenge. I needed records. The dining room still glowed. Callista was showing off the bag again to one of the guests who'd lingered. Vervain was laughing like this was the best Christmas yet. Thorin was nodding along, half listening as always. I walked back to the threshold, wineglass in hand, full but untouched. "Let me be clear," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a knife through meringue. "This isn't about a bag or a receipt. This is about value. Mine. You don't get to erase me and spend me, too. Callista opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I turned without waiting for a reply and walked upstairs, each step deliberate. In my old room, still bare, still labeled guest, in every sense, I closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a long breath. They could have asked. They could have said thank you. But they hadn't. Because in their story, I didn't matter enough to include. And that, more than the money, more than the lies, that was what cost the most. The door to the guest room clicked shut behind me, but I didn't sit down. I didn't cry, either. I just stood there, still holding the glass of wine I'd brought up, still untouched. The burgundy liquid shimmered in the low lamplight like it was waiting for something too. Maybe a toast, maybe a truth. Dinner was called not long after. I set the glass down, smoothed my sleeves, and headed downstairs. I wasn't hungry, but showing up was half the point. I didn't want them to pretend I was sulking. I wanted them to see me walk in. The table was perfection, of course. Tall tapers flickered in antique holders. The scent of roasted poultry and rosemary floated through the room like a designer fragrance. Vervain was fussing with napkin folds. Thorin had already poured wine for the guest next to him, and Callista was mid-laugh before I even entered the room. I took my seat quietly. No one greeted me. Then the dishes came out, each like an unveiling. Roasted carrots with honey glaze, wild rice with pomegranate seeds, and at the center of it all, Callista's favorite, walnut rosemary chicken salad. Her eyes lit up like she was seeing an old lover. "Oh my God, yes," she breathed. "This. Mom, you outdid yourself." Vervain beamed. "You always loved this one." I looked at my plate and froze. Walnuts. Not pecans, not almonds. Walnuts. I was allergic, severely, always had been. Every family dinner growing up had an alternate dish for me. Every restaurant choice came with a call ahead. There had even been an incident once when I was 12 that ended in an ER visit. But tonight? Nothing. No substitution. No mention. "You can just eat around the nuts, dear," Vervain said breezily, as if she'd anticipated the hesitation. Callista smirked. "It's not a crime to like what you like." I pushed the plate aside and reached for a slice of plain bread. No one asked why. They remembered what she liked. They forgot what could kill me. Conversation turned quickly to lighter things. Aspen, flights, new boots. Callista's voice bounced from topic to topic, like a practice speech. Then Vervain chimed in. "It was a bit tight this year, but everyone pitched in to help her get there." "Even Big Sis helped," Callista added, lifting her wineglass in my direction. "Right, Venny?" Thorin chuckled, raised his glass. "Team effort." I didn't say a word, but I recognized the transaction. It had posted 2 days before her trip. A charge to my backup card, the one I forgot they had access to. I had canceled it last night. They weren't even hiding it, just repackaging theft as sentiment. I could have let it go. I really could have. But not after the nuts. Not after the receipt. Not after watching them look through me like furniture. I cleared my throat. "You know," I said, gently tapping my glass with my fork, "if you're going to spend my money, at least send a thank you note." The room fell quiet. Callista's face went flat. "You always make everything about you. You're not the only one who exists," she added, her tone sharpening. Vervain jumped in. "We're a family. We share things. You're too sensitive." "Sharing without permission isn't love," I replied. "It's entitlement." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I stood. My chair made the smallest creak as it moved back, louder in the silence than any scream. "I'm done playing the invisible donor," I said. "You want someone to bankroll your fantasies, find a new number to call." I didn't wait for them to process it. I walked out of that dining room and didn't look back. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a strategy. By the time I reached the landing, the house had grown louder again. Callista's laughter echoing off the walls, the clinking of dessert forks, the hum of another round of music from the Bluetooth speaker. I didn't stop in the room. I didn't even close the door all the way. I just stood there for a moment, long enough to hear my name not being mentioned in a conversation downstairs. Then I came back down. I took the long way to the den, past the hallway mirror, the curated family coat rack, the neatly stacked shoes, none of which were mine. The only trace of me was the set of car keys in my pocket. They were gathered around the television now, Vervain standing like a conductor about to cue an orchestra. She pressed a button on the remote, and the projector flickered to life. It cast a soft glow against the blank wall, dust catching the light like a quiet storm. "This is always my favorite part," she said to the guests, a little trip down memory lane. The slideshow began. Christmas mornings blurred one into the next. Snowmen, matching pajamas, hand-decorated cookies. Clip after clip rolled by, edited with transitions, overlaid with royalty-free piano music. All of it polished to perfection. All of it. Without me. In one clip, they're opening stockings. I remember standing just outside the frame, holding a camera, laughing when Thorin dropped his orange into the dog's water bowl. In this version, there's no voice behind the lens. There's no lens. There's just absence. A guest, seated near the edge of the couch, leaned toward Vervain and whispered, "Didn't you used to have another daughter?" Vervain didn't flinch. She smiled, eyes still on the screen. "She's here, somewhere. Somewhere. Not, she's right there." Not even a glance in my direction, just a shrugging off. I didn't respond. I didn't even look at her. I watched the rest of the slideshow like I was watching a documentary about a family I'd never known. Familiar architecture, unfamiliar casting. When it ended, there was light applause. Callista turned on another lamp. Vervain carried in a tray of peppermint bark and hot cocoa, passing cups with names written in metallic ink. Each person received a cloth napkin, hand-embroidered. Thorin's with a stitched golf club, Vervain's with a red cardinal, Callista's with a scripted C and a tiny star. Even the dogs had a bone pattern. Mine was plain, white, nothing. I picked it up, unfolded it slowly, then refolded it with the same care. I placed it back on the table. "You can keep this one," I said, voice low but clear. "It fits your narrative better." Callista rolled her eyes. Vervain turned away like she hadn't heard. Thorin sipped his drink, eyes glued to the fireplace. I pushed back from the table and stood. I walked out of the room. Upstairs again, I didn't turn on the light. The glow from the laptop screen was enough. I sat down and opened my desktop folder, created a subfolder titled Timeline. Inside it, I dropped screenshots of my credit card statements, date-stamped files, email logs, everything they'd used without my consent. I opened another document and titled it, For Them, Not Yet. It was time-stamped automatically. I wasn't going to post it. I wasn't going to call a family meeting, but I was going to be ready. Ready for when the denial came. Ready for the inevitable claims of, "We didn't know," or "You're reading too much into it," because they weren't erasing me by accident. They were erasing me because it made the story cleaner, easier to sell. But I had the receipts. If they were writing me out of the story, I was writing the ending myself. I woke up to a vibration under my pillow. My phone, screen still lit, was flooded with notifications. Texts, tags, and a familiar ache that had nothing to do with sleep. My finger hovered over the screen. I already knew what I'd see before I tapped. Callista's latest post greeted me like a punch to the throat. A perfectly angled selfie, her in front of the tree, coffee in one hand, wrapped in a faux fur throw. The caption read, "So grateful to be surrounded by the people who always lift me up. Some people choose distance over love, and that's their story. I choose peace." 30,000 likes. The comments were the usual parade of performative sympathy. "You're the strong one, girl." "You don't need that negativity." "Family can be so toxic, stay glowing." My name wasn't mentioned. It didn't need to be. I took a screenshot, then another of the comment section. Not because I needed to remember, but because patterns matter. I dropped both into the Reclaim folder under Narratives. This wasn't just dysfunction anymore. This was marketing. I wasn't blocked from the post. That would have been too obvious. No, she wanted me to see it, to scroll past it, to sit with it. I turned off the screen. The silence in the guest room was heavier now, thicker. I pulled on my sweater and stepped into the hallway. The house was still asleep, save for the faint hum of the heating vent and the ticking of the hallway clock. I made my way to the bathroom at the end of the hall. The mirror greeted me before the light did. Written across the glass in what looked like soap, or maybe the leftover residue from a dry erase marker, were the words, "Some people just can't stand not being the center of attention." No signature, but I didn't need one. It wasn't Callista's handwriting. It was neater. Controlled. Verraine. I stood there for a moment, letting the message soak into my reflection. Then I reached for a tissue, wiped it clean in 2 quick strokes. The glass gleamed again. Blank. Indifferent. With the pad of my finger, I wrote something small in the corner. Silence is strategy. It wasn't meant to be read. It was meant to be left behind. I washed my hands, dried them slowly, then walked back down the hallway. Not to confront anyone. Not yet. I returned to the guest room, opened my laptop, and clicked back into the Reclaim folder. A new set of subfolders went in. Transactions. Edits. Inheritance. Narratives. I wasn't writing a diary. I was building a case. Each screenshot got its place. Each document, a name. For every lie told out loud, I stored a truth in silence. There was no grand plan to expose them. No press conference, no family showdown. I didn't want an audience, but I wanted accuracy. That morning, Verraine posted a photo of the breakfast spread on Facebook. "Love in every detail," the caption read. The plate in the photo was mine. The seat I'd refused. The mug I hadn't touched. I added it to staged moments. People believe what they see. I made sure I had both versions. By mid-morning, Callista was live on Instagram, talking softly about letting go of hurt, about choosing joy, while subtle tears glistened beneath the ring light. Her voice cracked at just the right pitch. The comments flooded in. "Don't let her bring you down. You've done nothing wrong. Some people just want to be victims." I watched in silence, then clicked record. I wasn't capturing her. I was capturing the gap between performance and history. She ended with, "Sometimes you just have to move on without closure." I closed the tab. No comment, no share, no message. Instead, I opened a document titled Inheritance and began listing property values, transfer dates, legal contacts. A separate tab held voice memos I'd saved over the years, conversations where I'd been told, "It's not about money. You're overthinking. We'll circle back." I listened to a few. Then I added dates, summaries, cross-referenced them with receipts. I wasn't the ghost, I typed at the top of the file. I was the historian. And when they finally asked for my side of the story, I wasn't going to argue. I was going to send them a folder. The lights downstairs were already on by the time I zipped my coat and headed toward the staircase. From the hallway, I could hear Callista's voice rising above the polite chatter of extended family and neighbors. Her cadence rehearsed, her laughter perfectly spaced between stories. The gift exchange was about to begin, the performance part of the day. I paused at the top step. My breath caught for a second, not from nerves, but calculation. Then I descended slowly, not because I needed the theatrics, but because I deserved to be seen arriving on my own terms. The living room glowed with seasonal abundance. Pillows fluffed, candles lit, ribbon-wrapped boxes stacked symmetrically near the fireplace. Verraine stood front and center in her deep green blouse, holding a tray of cranberry spritzers, like a hostess at a holiday catalog shoot. Thorin nodded from his seat, half in, half checked out, like always. I slipped through the room toward the hallway on the left. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. Just past the coat closet was the wall of family achievements, framed with soft white trim, lit from above by a small gallery spotlight. I'd seen it before, but never studied it the way I did now. Photos of Callista at her high school graduation, at a gallery opening, mid-laugh with Verraine, a framed invitation to her latest art show in Denver, even a local newspaper clipping about her rising social media impact, pride in pastel frames. And on the bottom row, next to a photo of our dog in a Halloween costume, was my law school diploma. Cropped. No date, no ceremony, just the document. Bare. No mention of the national award I'd won last year. No picture from the TEDx event I'd flown myself to. Not even a candid shot. Legacy was never the issue, I whispered to myself. Visibility was. I walked upstairs again, this time without guilt. In the hallway linen drawer, half pulled open, I spotted a small stack of old greeting cards and receipts. Something made me stop. Under a faded Christmas card, addressed to "My Favorite," was a folded yellowed note. Verraine's handwriting was unmistakable. Callista will take the family forward. Venetra will always land on her feet. She doesn't need us. Dated 3 years ago. The same year, I asked for a bridge loan after a contract fell through, and was told, "We're a little strapped ourselves." I took a photo of the note, then folded it slowly and slid it into my coat pocket. Downstairs, Callista was holding up a large framed print. The crowd applauded. Flashbulbs went off. The print read, "The heart of our home. Callista, forever our light." More clapping. I stepped into the room just as they were handing her a pen to sign the back. I said nothing. I walked straight to the coffee table, set the white envelope I'd labeled, "For them." Not yet. In the center of the holiday spread, and turned to walk away. "What's this?" Thorin asked, frowning. Verraine leaned forward. I kept walking. "Documentation," I said evenly. "Receipts, ownership transfers, messages you hoped were never found." The room fell completely silent. Consider this the first real family portrait. No one followed me as I crossed the room. Not a word came after me. And that, more than anything, told me I had timed it right. They didn't touch the envelope at first. It just sat there in the middle of the coffee table, wedged between a stack of untouched gingerbread cookies and a glossy magazine with Callista on the cover. The room was still draped in the scent of cinnamon and wood polish, but the warmth had evaporated. I stood just inside the archway, watching them try to decide who would open it. It was Verraine who reached for it, not because she wanted to, but because the silence had shifted, heavy now with expectation, with threat. She peeled the seal slowly, too slowly. I could see her eyes scanning the first page, then the second. Her fingers began to tremble. Thorin leaned over her shoulder, brows furrowing. Callista was frozen, wineglass still in hand, the smile on her lips slowly collapsing. There it was. The original will. Grandpa's signature, the notary stamp, everything in order. The house, the one we were sitting in, was mine. Not ours, not family estate. Mine. Verraine cleared her throat. This can't be right. He left it to the family, to all of us. I stepped forward, but not close. Just enough that she had to look up. "You changed the password to his cloud account 3 days after the funeral," I said. "You deleted the folder labeled Final Wishes, but you forgot about the archive my lawyer had on file. Dated, notarized, witnessed." She paled but held her ground. "He told us everything was to be shared. He just didn't update." "Stop," I cut in. "You hoped I'd never look. You counted on me disappearing quietly, like I always did." Thorin finally spoke, voice lower than usual. "It's just a house." "Then why lie about it?" He had no answer. Callista blinked, like someone had turned a spotlight on her. "I didn't know, I swear." I turned to her slowly. "You didn't ask. That's the problem. None of you ever ask." There was a long pause. "I thought we were a team," Thorin added. "We had to make decisions. Things were tight." I faced him fully. You promised me the cabin on the lake. Remember that? You said it was mine if I helped you refinance. You looked me in the eye and said, "This family takes care of its own." His jaw worked silently before he muttered, "We needed options. We didn't think you'd want it." "You didn't think I mattered," I corrected. "You made that choice for me." Callista took a step forward. "Look, this is all a misunderstanding. Mom didn't mean—" I raised a hand. Not yelling, just done. "This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a pattern." From the corner of the room, the family friend who'd stayed quiet this whole time finally spoke. "This is theft," she said. Calm, blunt. "Inheritance fraud." Varane's mouth tightened. "You don't know the history." The friend looked at her evenly. "I just saw the evidence, and I won't forget it." No one moved. I nodded once. No drama, no flourish. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "Just to close the book." I turned and walked out of the house. The front door creaked softly behind me as I stepped into the snow. The wind had picked up. It was sharp but clean, like it was clearing something out of the air. They could keep the decorations, the tree, the matching stockings. They could pose for photos next year and tell whatever story they wanted. But now, they'd have to tell it without me. And without the house. I drove through town with the windows half down. Not for the air, too cold for comfort, but because I needed something real to touch my face. Something not curated or softened or followed by a fake smile. By the time I parked at the small inn I'd booked on the other side of Boulder, the sun had just started to rise over the hills. Pale gold light stretched across rooftops, too honest to lie. I sat in the car for a moment, keys still in the ignition, watching condensation fade from the windshield. Inside, the room was small, basic, but it didn't smell like tension. There were no scripted smiles, no layers of quiet expectation, just silence. Honest, unpolished silence. I checked my phone as I slid my suitcase into the corner. 7 emails, 5 from Varane, 2 from Thorin, and 1 tagged post from Callista that I already knew I shouldn't open, but did anyway. The caption read, "Money doesn't buy family, it only rents revenge." The photo? A childhood picture of the 3 of us, me, Callista, and a dog we'd had for one summer before giving it away. Cropped so my face was barely visible. The comments, as always, rolled in fast. "Stay strong, Queen." "She's just jealous." Some people cut themselves out. I stared at the screen, not shocked, just confirmed. I didn't reply. I didn't post my version. I just flagged it for documentation and moved on. Varane's emails were worse. "Let's not let this destroy us. You've always been so strong. Family should stick together, not tear each other apart." Words that read like apologies, but weren't. Only one message stood out, Thorin's. Subject: "We may need to sell the condo." Just that. I filed it into the folder marked Consequences. Later that morning, I walked to a cafe downtown. I ordered black coffee, no room, and chose a table by the window. The kind of table people pick when they want to be alone, but still visible. I pulled out my phone again, scrolled through old bank statements, watched the slow tick of my savings account on the screen. It was enough. Not comfortable, not luxurious, but enough. My phone buzzed. Ira Lynn. "You did it," she said, skipping a greeting. "You did what none of us ever dared to. You put truth above illusion." "I didn't expect the silence afterward," I replied. "It's always quiet after a building falls. That doesn't mean it wasn't necessary." We didn't talk long. We didn't need to. She reminded me that sanity didn't have to be loud to be solid. That distance wasn't always abandonment. It could be protection. After we hung up, I sipped my coffee, watching a mother across the street help her toddler out of a puffy jacket. She kissed his forehead and laughed at something he said. The kind of moment people post online, not for memory, but performance. But this one, it looked real. I pulled out my notebook and began to write. Not receipts this time, not timelines. Just thoughts. what I'd learned, what I wouldn't accept again, what I owed to myself now that I'd reclaimed what was mine. Not just a house, my story, my peace. Taking it back wasn't spite, it was survival. The morning after the storm always feels quieter than it should. I opened the curtains in my new home and let the light flood in. The windows still smelled faintly of fresh sealant. The floor creaked in a way that wasn't familiar yet, but it was mine. All of it. I stood in the middle of the living room, coffee in hand, wearing a sweater that didn't match anything but comfort. No more stockings, no curated tree, just a house that didn't lie about who it belonged to. A knock at the door startled me. It wasn't loud, just 3 quick, almost polite taps. I opened it to find my new neighbor, an older woman in a worn fleece coat, holding a basket of muffins and looking slightly nervous. "Hope I'm not interrupting," she said. "Just thought I'd welcome you properly." I thanked her, took the basket, and offered her a seat on the porch bench. We talked briefly, weather, street noise, the usual. Then she paused and said, almost too casually, "I saw your sister's post. Didn't know they left you out. But I'm glad you're back. That house needed someone real in it." I smiled. Not because it healed anything, but because someone had finally said the thing no one inside that house ever would. I didn't need validation, I thought as she walked away. But truth always finds its own echo. When I returned inside, there was a letter waiting on the small table near the door. I hadn't noticed it before. No return address, but the handwriting gave it away immediately. Verraine. 2 pages. Handwritten. No envelope. Just folded in half like she couldn't decide whether it deserved formality. I read it standing up. "We thought you were too strong to need us. You always seemed so capable. Callista's struggling now. We didn't expect you to be so cold." It wasn't an apology. It was a justification, a rewriting, a subtle plea for permission to feel okay about what they'd done by pretending they meant something else. I didn't cry. I folded the letter, walked it upstairs, and slid it into the drawer I'd labeled months ago, long before any of this unfolded, marked unanswered. It joined the others. I closed it softly. That afternoon, Irilyn stopped by. She knocked like she always did. Twice, pause, then a third. Her rhythm, her honesty, her presence. I opened the door, and she walked in without saying anything. We made tea together in silence, moved around each other like people who didn't need to ask how the other was doing, because they already knew. She noticed the open box of seeds on the counter. "You finally starting that garden?" "Thought I'd try rosemary first," I said. "Full circle." She smiled and glanced around the house. "You made this a home faster than they ever made you one." I leaned against the counter. "Because it's mine, finally." We sat outside as the sun dropped behind the trees. The air had a bite to it, but not enough to send us back in. The sky was soft gray, and for the first time in months, I wasn't scanning for storm clouds. Irilyn didn't stay long. She never did. But before she left, she placed her hand over mine. "You didn't lose them," she said. "You released them." After she drove away, I walked back inside, barefoot against the wood floors I'd picked out myself. The fridge hummed. A light flickered in the hallway, which I made a note to fix. Life had returned to the simplest tasks, and with every passing moment, I realized more and more. Closure didn't come from their remorse. It came from my refusal to need it anymore. The first week of January in Boulder is quiet. Streets are still speckled with bits of snow hardened into gray slush. Holiday lights flicker half-heartedly on porches that feel less festive now. I sipped my tea at the kitchen window and watched my breath briefly cloud the glass before disappearing. It was the kind of peace I used to envy in other people's lives. The ordinary kind. A moving box sat in the corner, the last one. I hadn't opened it yet, not out of dread, just delay. The kind of delay that comes when you no longer feel rushed to prove anything. Inside, tucked in between bubble wrap and an old candle holder, was the ceramic frame I'd once given Verraine. A gift for her birthday, back when I still believed that giving meant something. It was still in its original packaging, untouched. I took it out, unwrapped it slowly, and walked it over to the window ledge. It looked different here, smaller maybe, or maybe just more honest. I pulled a photo from my desk drawer, one I'd taken weeks ago. Me, standing in front of this very house, keys in hand, alone, but not lost. I slid the picture into the frame and adjusted it so it faced the light. They discarded what they didn't value. I reclaimed it because I did. Later that morning, I found a card in the mailbox. Handwritten, no return name, just the apartment number. "Thank you," it read, "for treating us like people, not placeholders." I smiled without realizing it. That tenant had only lived upstairs for 2 months. I'd lowered their rent by $50 after finding out they were taking care of a parent in hospice. No announcement, no praise, just decency. That card meant more than any letter Verlaine could have written. That same afternoon, I walked through each room of the house, my house. The walls had been repainted, the curtains replaced, every drawer had been cleaned. There were no more dusty holiday boxes labeled Callista's keepsakes, no more faded picture frames with missing names. In the den, I lit a candle and sat on the couch with my journal. The room felt bigger now, not because I'd added anything, but because I'd stopped shrinking to fit it. On the mantel, I'd placed one photo, just one. It was me, holding a coffee mug that now read, in gold script, "Center of my own life." The group email came that evening. From Verlaine. Subject: "Hope you're doing well." I didn't open it. I didn't delete it either. I simply archived it, filed away under unnecessary. The truth was, I didn't need them to check in. I needed space. I needed air. And I'd found both. They'd asked for family. I'd asked for honesty. Only one of us got what we wanted. And it wasn't them. I stood at the window that night, watching the wind bend the branches outside. A few leftover lights still blinked on a neighbor's porch across the street. Everything felt quieter. Not hollow, just still. Closure didn't arrive in a single moment. It showed up in details, in the right kind of silence, in being able to fall asleep without planning your next defense. I turned off the lights, walked upstairs, brushed my teeth with the radio playing in the background, folded laundry in pajama pants that didn't match, set my alarm, not for court or confrontation, but for a run by the lake in the morning. I had plans. None of them required anyone's permission. Love that you earn isn't love. It's labor. I stopped working for what should have been free.